Wash these boots, wipe the floors thoroughly, and serve my lunch.
There are moments in life when betrayal doesn't arrive wearing the face of an enemy. It smiles across the dinner table. It calls you family. It reminds you that blood is thicker than water while quietly taking everything you ever loved. Imagine inheriting a beautiful home from the one person who believed in you more than anyone else, only to be forced to scrub its floors, wash its dishes, and sleep in a tiny storage room, while everyone else lived like royalty under your own roof. Imagine hearing your own relatives call you worthless every single day without realizing that every wall surrounding them legally belonged to you. Now imagine the morning they finally discovered the truth. It wasn't just their expressions that changed. Their entire world collapsed in front of them, because the woman they had treated like a servant for years was never their employee. She was their landlord. She was the rightful owner of everything they believed they controlled. Stay with us, because this story takes one shocking turn after another, and by the end, you'll understand why the greatest revenge doesn't always come through anger. Sometimes it comes through patience, truth, and perfect timing. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Emily Carter, a 28-year-old woman whose quiet nature often convinced people she lacked strength. They mistook kindness for weakness because they had never witnessed what genuine resilience looked like. Emily wasn't loud. She didn't argue. She rarely defended herself when someone spoke harshly. Instead, she carried every insult the way old trees carry the scars left behind by countless storms. Her soft brown eyes held the warmth of someone who still searched for goodness even after disappointment became a familiar companion. She worked carefully, spoke respectfully, and believed promises should mean something. Those qualities came from her grandmother, Eleanor Carter, the woman who had raised Emily after her parents died in a tragic highway accident when she was only 9 years old. Eleanor wasn't wealthy by the standards of luxury magazines or television shows, but she possessed something much greater. She understood the value of honesty, hard work, and unconditional love. Every evening, she reminded Emily that a person's character was measured by how they treated those who could offer them nothing in return. Emily carried those words into adulthood without realizing they would one day become the very lesson her own family would fail to learn. When Eleanor passed away peacefully at the age of 83, the entire neighborhood gathered to honor the woman who had quietly spent decades helping struggling families, volunteering at local shelters, and offering meals to anyone who knocked on her door hungry. Her funeral overflowed with flowers, memories, and grateful tears. Standing beside the polished wooden casket, Emily believed she had lost the last person who truly saw her heart. She had no idea that her grandmother had spent the final years of her life carefully arranging one last act of protection. Eleanor knew certain members of the Carter family had always been fascinated by her beautiful Victorian home that stood proudly on Maple Ridge, surrounded by towering oak trees and colorful gardens that bloomed every spring. She also knew exactly how greed could transform familiar faces into strangers. Long before illness weakened her body, Eleanor met privately with her attorney and prepared a detailed estate plan. She never announced her decision because she wanted the truth to reveal itself only when the time was right. She believed that hidden character eventually introduces itself without anyone forcing the moment. Only 3 days after the funeral, the atmosphere inside the once peaceful home changed so quickly it felt as though kindness itself had packed its bags and disappeared. Emily's uncle, Richard Carter, arrived with his wife Linda and their 2 adult children, Jason and Madison, claiming they wanted to help organize Eleanor's belongings and support Emily through her grief. Their comforting words sounded sincere enough that Emily welcomed them without hesitation. During the first evening, they cooked dinner together, shared stories about Eleanor, and laughed over old family photographs. Emily allowed herself to believe she wasn't alone anymore. But as the days passed, Warmth slowly disappeared from every conversation. Richard began making decisions without asking Emily. Linda criticized how the house was cleaned, despite Emily spending hours caring for every room. Jason left dirty clothes scattered across the furniture, expecting someone else to collect them. Madison complained about meals, decorations, and even the temperature inside the house, as though she were staying at an expensive resort instead of her late grandmother's home. Each small moment felt insignificant on its own, yet together they painted a picture Emily couldn't quite understand. Something had shifted, and she could feel herself becoming smaller inside a house that had once made her feel safe. Then came the meeting that quietly changed the direction of Emily's life. Richard gathered everyone in the living room with a folder resting confidently in his hands. He explained that Eleanor's finances had been complicated and that the family needed to remain together while legal matters were sorted out. He insisted attorneys were still reviewing the estate and claimed nobody officially owned the property yet. Emily had never handled legal documents before, so she trusted him without question. Richard spoke with the calm certainty of someone who expected every word to be accepted as fact. He suggested Emily contribute by managing the household until everything was finalized. At first, that sounded reasonable. She had always enjoyed cooking and keeping the house organized because it reminded her of the years spent caring for Eleanor. But those simple responsibilities quickly expanded into something entirely different. Breakfast had to be prepared before sunrise. Every bedroom had to remain spotless regardless of who created the mess. Laundry piled higher each day. Grocery shopping became Emily's responsibility, even though she paid with the small savings she had earned from working part-time at the local bookstore. Without realizing it, she had stopped living in the home and started serving everyone inside it. Weeks turned into months, and Emily slowly disappeared beneath endless responsibilities. Richard began introducing her to visitors as the person helping around the house instead of his niece. Linda casually referred to Emily as the live-in housekeeper whenever neighbors stopped by for coffee. At first, Emily assumed they were joking, but nobody laughed. Jason treated her requests with dismissive shrugs, while Madison barely acknowledged her presence unless another chore needed to be completed. Meals were expected on schedule. Floors had to shine. Fresh flowers had to decorate the dining table because Linda insisted appearances mattered. Emily slept in the small storage room near the laundry area, after Linda claimed the larger guest bedroom would be more useful as Madison's private office. Every night, Emily stared at the narrow ceiling, wondering how her grandmother's warm home had become a place where she felt invisible. Yet she remained because Richard repeatedly assured her the estate would soon be settled and everything would become clear. Emily held on to that promise because hope was easier to carry than suspicion, even when both weighed heavily on her heart. Emily never realized the exact moment. Hope began turning into quiet suspicion. It wasn't because someone finally admitted the truth. It was because the lies stopped fitting together. Richard's explanations changed depending on who asked the questions. One week, he insisted the attorneys were still reviewing Eleanor's estate. 2 weeks later, he claimed the county office had delayed the paperwork. Another month passed, and suddenly he blamed missing documents that supposedly needed additional signatures. Emily wanted to believe him because trusting family felt easier than accepting something far more painful. Yet every excuse sounded more rehearsed than the last. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, while dusting Eleanor's old library, Emily accidentally knocked over a framed photograph of herself and her grandmother taken on her 18th birthday. As she picked it up, she noticed the frame was much heavier than she remembered. The back panel had been carefully sealed, almost as though someone wanted whatever was inside to remain hidden until the right moment. With trembling fingers, Emily opened it and discovered a neatly folded envelope with her name written across the front in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. Her heart pounded as though time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The letter wasn't long, but every sentence carried the weight of years. Eleanor wrote that if Emily was reading those words, it meant she was no longer there to protect her. She warned her never to sign any legal document without reading it carefully and reminded her that truth has a way of waiting patiently for those willing to search for it. The final line lingered in Emily's mind long after she folded the letter closed. It simply read, "Everything I promised you is already yours. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Emily read those words over and over until sunset painted the library windows with soft golden light. Nothing in the letter specifically mentioned the house, yet it unsettled everything Richard had told her. If her grandmother believed everything was already hers, why had the legal process stretched on for nearly a year without progress? Why had no attorney ever contacted her directly? Why had every conversation about the estate happened only when Richard decided it should? Questions she had buried beneath exhaustion suddenly returned stronger than ever. That evening, during dinner, Emily cautiously asked whether there had been any recent updates from the lawyers. Richard barely looked up from his plate before repeating another familiar explanation about paperwork taking longer than expected. Linda quickly interrupted, saying legal matters were too complicated for Emily to understand and that she should focus on keeping the house presentable because guests were coming that weekend. Jason laughed and joked that Emily worried far too much for someone who didn't own anything anyway. Madison smiled without saying a word, but her expression carried enough satisfaction to sting. Emily lowered her eyes and quietly finished clearing the table. For the first time in months, she wasn't hurt by their comments. She was paying attention to what they were trying so hard to avoid. The following morning, Emily made a decision that frightened her more than she cared to admit. Instead of heading straight to the grocery store as Linda instructed, she stopped by the small law office Eleanor had visited several times during her retirement. The brass nameplate outside still read Daniel Brooks, attorney at law. Emily remembered Mr. Brooks from childhood as the kind gentleman who always gave her peppermint candy whenever Eleanor brought her along. His hair had turned completely gray, but his warm smile appeared the moment he recognized her. Before Emily could even explain why she had come, Mr. Brooks looked genuinely surprised. He asked why she hadn't returned his phone calls months earlier. Emily stared at him in confusion. She had never received a single call. Mr. Brooks frowned, opened an old file cabinet, and carefully pulled out Eleanor's estate records. Inside were multiple certified letters addressed to Emily, each marked as delivered to the Maple Ridge home but never answered. Emily felt a chill travel through her entire body. Every envelope listed the same address, where she had lived every day since Eleanor passed away. She hadn't ignored those letters because she never saw them. Someone else had received them first. Mr. Brooks gently explained that Eleanor's estate had actually been settled only 6 weeks after her funeral. According to the legally executed will, the Victorian home, the surrounding property, several investment accounts, and a trust established years earlier had all been left exclusively to Emily. Eleanor had included a detailed explanation stating that Emily alone had cared for her through illness while expecting nothing in return. Richard and the rest of the family had each received modest financial gifts, but ownership of the home belonged entirely to Emily from the moment probate concluded. Mr. Brooks paused, noticing the disbelief spreading across her face. He then reached into the file and placed a certified copy of the deed on the desk between them. There it was in clear black ink. Owner, Emily Grace Carter. The room became strangely quiet. Emily wasn't overwhelmed by excitement. She wasn't thinking about wealth or property. She was remembering every floor she had scrubbed on aching knees, every meal she had prepared before sunrise, every insult she had swallowed while standing inside a house that had legally been hers all along. The realization didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with heartbreak, because the people responsible weren't strangers trying to steal from her. They were family. Emily left the office carrying a folder that felt far heavier than paper should. As she walked home beneath rows of towering maple trees, memories began connecting themselves in ways they never had before. Richard insisting that all legal correspondence should come through him. Linda volunteering to collect the daily mail because she claimed Emily worked too hard. Jason always hovering near the front door whenever certified envelopes arrived. Madison encouraging Emily to sign blank forms without reading them because they were supposedly routine estate paperwork. Every confusing moment finally made sense. None of it had been accidental. They had counted on Emily trusting them completely, believing she would never question their authority or investigate the truth herself. More painful than the deception was realizing how carefully it had been planned. They hadn't simply accepted her willingness to help around the house. They had transformed her kindness into unpaid labor while living comfortably inside property that never belonged to them. Emily tightened her grip on the folder, but made no immediate decision. She understood that exposing the truth required more than emotion. It required patience. The same patience Eleanor had quietly practiced throughout her life. If the truth had survived hidden for nearly a year, it could survive a little longer until the right moment arrived. When Emily returned that afternoon, nothing inside the house appeared different, yet everything felt changed. Richard sat comfortably in Eleanor's favorite reading chair, discussing expensive renovations he hoped to begin before Christmas. Linda criticized the fresh flowers Emily had arranged because they weren't the color she preferred. Jason tossed his muddy work boots near the front entrance and called for Emily to clean the floor before the stains dried. Madison complained that her bedroom windows hadn't been polished properly. They spoke with complete confidence, unaware that the woman quietly carrying grocery bags through the kitchen doorway now understood exactly who she was. Emily responded the same way she always had, politely and calmly, giving them no reason to suspect anything had changed. But deep inside, something had awakened that could never again be silenced. She was no longer waiting for someone else to tell her what her future would look like. Every chore she completed became another reminder that their comfort rested on borrowed time. Every demand they made only strengthened her resolve. Eleanor's final gift had never been the house alone. It was the opportunity to reveal people's true character without interrupting them. And now that Emily finally possessed the truth, she knew the day was approaching when every lie spoken beneath that roof would meet the one thing it could never outrun. Emily spent the next several days watching quietly instead of reacting. She carried the certified deed, her grandmother's letter, and every legal document Mr. Brooks had given her inside a plain leather folder that never left her side whenever she stepped outside the house. Each evening, she returned it to a small, locked suitcase hidden beneath the narrow bed in the storage room where she had slept for nearly a year. Looking around that tiny space, she realized it wasn't just a room. It was a symbol of everything her family believed about her. They thought she would always accept less. They thought gratitude meant silence. Thought kindness could be stretched until it became surrender. Emily understood that confronting them in anger would only create another argument they could manipulate. She remembered Eleanor's favorite saying whenever neighbors disagreed over property lines or family matters. "The truth never needs to shout," her grandmother would say. "It only needs the chance to stand in the light." Emily decided that when the truth finally stood before everyone, there would be no room left for excuses. She contacted Daniel Brooks and asked him one simple question. "If I want this handled the right way, without yelling or revenge, what should I do?" Mr. Brooks smiled gently and told her the law had already done the hardest part. Now all she needed was the courage to let everyone see it. That opportunity arrived sooner than anyone expected. Richard proudly announced that the family would be hosting a large Sunday gathering to celebrate what he called the future of the Carter estate. Relatives from neighboring towns accepted the invitation, along with several close family friends who had known Eleanor for decades. Richard planned to announce that he intended to renovate the house and keep it in the Carter family for generations. Emily listened from the kitchen as Linda excitedly discussed new furniture, expensive landscaping, and even removing Eleanor's cherished rose garden to make room for a modern patio. Every word felt like another page being torn from her grandmother's memory. Yet Emily remained composed. She prepared the meals, polished the silverware, and arranged the dining room exactly as Eleanor had taught her years before. Nobody noticed that she wasn't nervous anymore. They mistook her calmness for obedience, never realizing it came from certainty. The truth had already been written long before any of them decided to rewrite history. Sunday afternoon filled the house with familiar faces and cheerful conversation. Children ran across the front lawn, while older relatives admired the elegant architecture Eleanor had preserved for decades. Many guests warmly greeted Emily, remembering how faithfully she had cared for her grandmother through illness. Several quietly thanked her for everything she had done, while others seemed confused by the way Richard's immediate family casually ordered her around. Emily answered everyone with the same gentle smile she had worn throughout the past year. As lunch ended, Richard stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of sparkling cider. He cleared his throat and thanked everyone for coming. Speaking with complete confidence, he explained that the family was entering an exciting new chapter. He described renovation plans, future gatherings, and his vision for preserving what he repeatedly called my house. Guests applauded politely, believing they were witnessing a heartfelt family announcement. Emily looked toward Daniel Brooks, who had quietly entered moments earlier after accepting a personal invitation from her. He gave a small nod. The moment had finally arrived. Emily slowly walked to the center of the room, surprising everyone. Richard frowned, clearly irritated that she had interrupted his speech. Before he could speak, Emily calmly thanked every guest for honoring Eleanor's memory. She explained that her grandmother had always believed family should be built on honesty rather than convenience. Then she held up the leather folder and removed the certified deed. The room became silent enough to hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Emily didn't accuse anyone. She didn't raise her voice. She simply read the legal description exactly as it appeared on the document. Property owner, Emily Grace Carter. Effective immediately upon completion of probate. Daniel Brooks stepped forward, introduced himself, and confirmed that the estate had legally transferred nearly a year earlier. He explained that multiple certified notices had been mailed to Emily but had somehow never reached her hands. Gasps spread across the room. Faces that moments earlier carried relaxed smiles now reflected disbelief. Richard reached for the paperwork, insisting there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Daniel calmly produced certified court records, bearing official seals and signatures. There was nothing left to debate. The documents spoke with a clarity no argument could overcome. Richard's confidence disappeared almost instantly. Linda's face turned pale as she searched desperately for an explanation that would make the situation seem less deliberate. Jason insisted everyone had simply assumed Richard was handling the estate correctly. Madison claimed they had only been trying to help Emily because she seemed overwhelmed after Eleanor's passing. But every explanation collapsed beneath the weight of simple facts. They had opened mail that wasn't theirs. They had concealed legal documents. They had knowingly allowed Emily to believe she had no authority, while expecting her to maintain a home she already owned. Several relatives who had admired Richard moments earlier now stepped away from him in stunned silence. One elderly cousin quietly shook her head and whispered that Eleanor had warned her years earlier about how easily money could reveal a person's character. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. The room filled with the uncomfortable stillness that follows the arrival of undeniable truth. Emily looked around the house one last time before speaking again. She remembered learning to bake cookies beside Eleanor in the bright kitchen. She remembered decorating the Christmas tree together, planting flowers every spring, and listening to bedtime stories beside the fireplace where Richard had stood only minutes earlier, claiming ownership. This house had never been about wealth. It was where she learned compassion, responsibility, and forgiveness. Those memories mattered far more than expensive furniture or rising property values. Looking directly at Richard and the rest of his family, Emily admitted that she could have chosen anger. She could have celebrated their humiliation the same way they had ignored hers. But Eleanor had raised her differently. Justice and revenge were never the same thing. She quietly informed them that they would need to move out within 30 days, giving them enough time to find another place to live with dignity. During those 30 days, they would no longer expect her to cook, clean, shop, or serve them. From that moment forward, everyone would be responsible for themselves. If they wished to remain temporarily under her roof, they would treat both the home and its rightful owner with the respect they had refused to show before. It wasn't punishment, it was accountability. The following month transformed the house in ways Emily never imagined. Without someone quietly cleaning behind them, Richard's family quickly realized how much effort it took to maintain a large home. Laundry accumulated. Dishes remained in the sink. Floors lost their shine. Complaints gradually gave way to silence as each family member packed boxes and prepared to leave. There were no dramatic confrontations. No shouting matches echoed through the hallways. The greatest consequence wasn't losing the house. It was living every day with the knowledge that they had traded the trust of a loving family member for something that had never belonged to them in the first place. On the final morning, Richard paused near the front porch and softly apologized. It wasn't a polished speech or an attempt to regain ownership. It sounded like a man finally recognizing how far he had drifted from the values Eleanor spent a lifetime teaching. Emily accepted the apology without pretending the past had never happened. Some wounds heal slowly, and forgiveness doesn't erase memory. It simply refuses to let memory become the only thing shaping the future. Months later, the Victorian home looked alive again. Eleanor's rose garden bloomed brighter than ever, filling the yard with colors she had loved throughout her life. Emily reopened every room that had once felt heavy with sadness. She transformed the old guest bedroom into a reading space for neighborhood children, restored Eleanor's library, and partnered with a local charity to host monthly community dinners inside the very dining room where she had once eaten alone after serving everyone else. Laughter returned to the hallways. Music drifted through open windows on warm summer evenings. The house no longer represented betrayal. It represented healing. Visitors often remarked that stepping inside made them feel welcomed in a way they couldn't quite explain. Emily would simply smile, knowing the answer had been planted there long before she became its owner. It had been planted by a grandmother who believed love should outlive the person giving it. If this story teaches us anything, it's that titles, wealth, and appearances can fool people into believing they hold power over others. But character cannot be borrowed, stolen, or hidden forever. Emily never needed to prove her worth because it had always existed. The house was simply the evidence the world eventually caught up with. And perhaps the greatest lesson Eleanor left behind wasn't written in her will at all. It was demonstrated through the life she lived. Treat people with kindness when you have every reason not to. Protect what is right even when nobody is watching. And remember that the strongest foundation any home can ever have isn't built with wood or stone. It's built with integrity. Because when the truth finally opens the front door, it always knows exactly who belongs inside. If this story touched your heart, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you would have done if you were in Emily's shoes. And if you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another emotional story like this one. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and the people who truly value you.